Welcome to the CXO and CHRO Walk into a Bar, where we share insights at the intersection of talent and revenue. Dive into a unique narrative with our hosts, Michelle Strasburger, the insightful CHRO, and Dominique Sanfleur, the visionary CXO. Together, they bring dynamic perspectives that ignite thought-provoking dialogue from the C-suite. Each week, join us for electrifying sessions that confront the very challenges modern CXOs navigate in today's fast-paced business landscape. When split-second decisions loom, must it be talent or revenue that takes the hit? Or is there a harmonious crossroad where both can thrive? Can we blur the lines between talent and revenue? In every episode, we provide executive leaders with 3 strategic takeaways, transformative insights that will propel you to master the delicate balance between people and profit. It's not about winners or losers, but crafting an environment where everyone triumphs. Tune in and step closer to redefining executive success.
Hey,
I can't believe
hey.
it's Thursday again.
Say it again.
Can't believe it's Thursday again.
It is Thursday indeed. The week feels like it flew by quickly.
It did. It flew by fast. It's been a
Oh,
fast.
geez.
Welcome. I'm excited to be here. I'm Michelle Strasburger, the CEO of HR Rebooted, where we work with organizations to create intentional cultures to help organizations scale without losing their soul.
I'm Dominique St. Fleur, CEO of Intramark. We help organizations identify hidden risks like productivity gaps and unwanted turnover, and effectively creating that data layer on culture to surface those and get ahead of those risks for leaders and employees alike.
And today we are talking about unbossing middle management. It's such a fun word.
It is a pretty cool word, unbossing. And this is a pretty cool topic as well. It's been trendy. A lot of organizations have been exploring this concept for a variety of reasons. But I'm excited to jump into what this could mean, the pros and cons of unbossing your middle management. There are a lot of quote unquote benefits, from a leadership organizational perspective. And we'll get into some of the benefits, but there are some also drawbacks that we want to discuss as well. So excited.
Yeah, I think let's start with how we defined it, because I think we defined it in our own way, as we do on our calls. We have our own definition of our things. And so we looked at unbossing from a few different ways, or a few different perspectives. I think one was getting rid of your middle management. So eliminating that layer through reductions or restructuring or whatever you want to call it. So eliminating that middle management layer. Another one was giving them additional work. So kind of shifting their work. So they're kind of doing leadership, but also doing they're working too. So they're that working manager. And then the third is expanding their role. So they have many more direct reports. So they're kind of taking on more parts of the organization.
Absolutely. Or a combination of all three. And each of those examples are just ways of, getting as much work done for an organization with fewer roles, specifically at the supervision level. Michelle, what I could think of a variety of reasons why an organization would want to do this, and why it's gotten some attention in the market. What have you seen? What are some motivations that, for organizations to go down this path?
I think the first thing that comes to mind is the cost savings, right? We don't need that middle layer. We're able to do things more efficiently without that layer. We have people working remotely. We might not have that many people on site. We don't need that oversight anymore. We've gotten smarter. We've gotten more efficient with AI. And so we're able to kind of eliminate some of those costs. So I think first and foremost, it's a cost savings initiative for organizations.
Totally agree. Cost savings, efficiency. Apart from cost savings, are there any other motivations for this, or is that where the buck stops, pun intended? Is that really the largest and best case?
We've been seeing it in HR for a few years, and I think it's also, you're able to shift work and shift decision making. And so I think HR was a piece of that, where they were shifting that work and decision making back to leadership. And so we don't need, we've got the CHROs and we've got the HR managers. We don't need that director level within HR. I don't believe that, to all my HR friends watching this. I don't believe it. But I was seeing that. And in my HR Rebels group, I had HR directors going, I cannot find a job. Or I had CHROs in that group saying, I have HR manager positions open and I've got HR directors applying for it. And I don't have HR managers applying for it. So HR directors are willing to take that step down. And I do think it was because we were shifting their responsibilities to leadership or to other parts of the organization. And I think when we're unbossing, we're shifting the decision-making down to teams, or we're shifting it up to the next level of leadership.
You raise I totally agree. I've seen, HR, the HR function has been squeezed over the years. For a variety of reasons. A lot more is falling on fewer people within that function at almost any organization. What other functions is this more, or what other industries, functions, spaces is this more likely to occur unbossing than others? What HR function is definitely one. Where I can think of consulting, traditional consulting practices. I could see unbossing happening there. Are there any other spaces that are particularly ripe, if you will, for unbossing?
I also wonder if you see it in like customer service, or maybe even sales, where you might, we're automating a lot of things in those areas, and we may not need. We might not need as many people to escalate things to, because we're able to automate stuff and we're able to resolve things like that first call resolution, right? We're able to resolve things right away because of the automation that we have things in place.
That's a good point. I guess wherever AI is making the fastest headway as far as functions go or workflows go, you can expect more using.
Yeah, and I don't have the data for this, so anybody in the audience, don't call me on it. But we have this dynamic happening in the workplace where we don't have managers either. Like we're losing leadership, right? We have the baby boomers, which is our biggest generation in the workplace, that were in these key leadership roles, that are retiring and leaving the workplace one way or another. And then we have people opting out of leadership roles too. And so you've got the millennials coming in and they're like, no, thanks. I don't want that. And so we are forced to have these gaps as well. And so we are forced to be without them and learning to be without them. And so that, I don't think, I'm not sure that's a part of unbossing, but I think companies are learning different ways they're getting creative, and that's starting to be like, well, we can live without them. So let's see if we can do this in other departments.
Yeah, and I think what we're hitting on here is like there are several forces that are causing, either direct embossing or indirect embossing, right? One is the traditional cost savings, right? An organization looking at its, people portfolio and saying, where can we, flatten the organization, one, reduce costs, increase communication, so on and so forth. But I think you hit it on the head as well, is people don't want to, more and more people don't want to be people managers nowadays. And there's a lot more that comes with that, without necessarily commensurate compensation that for taking on that responsibility. And so organizations have to adapt to a thinner managerial level, middle management level. And so that's interesting. So cost cutting, AI, and then opting out are some three forces that are playing on the unbossing of middle managers. I think those are that's pretty comprehensive. Anything else that we missed that could be, so we could really dive into each of these areas.
I think that's it. I think there's
Yeah.
which I think we have for a future call too, this this push for kind of different organization types too, of more flattening organizations and like the teal organizations and less hierarchical organizations.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that's a real driver of unbossing at this point, but I think that's coming.
Yeah. Which should be a very exciting conversation, because it's really getting into, for organizations that are building new departments, for established organizations building new departments, or newer organizations that are just building out their org structure for the first time. What are some different org structures that you can experiment with that may or may not be working? So that's definitely an interesting conversation. But with unbossing, right, it's organizations pretty much established, and it's trying to figure out, how do we flatten, the layers, especially in a more competitive environment where you have more nimble, startups, or more nimble, business structures that are emerging, especially with AI. You have new entrants in the market that don't need as many layers. So there are a lot of things that are driving that. So an organization that is unbossing, right? You're established, you have a middle manager layer. There are several ways that they can go about doing that. So we established the why, right? Why they might be interested: cost cutting, AI, opting, middle managers opting out in general. But I guess it's worth discussing, how do organizations typically go about unbossing? And I think that could set the stage for, what are some pros, cons, and unintended consequences of that. First and foremost is the obvious, right? Organization is established, it's looking at its people portfolio, looking to unboss. Easy way to do that is layoffs.
That's probably the most common.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. It's really laying off the middle managers, in effect, getting to that unbossing. And Michelle, I think you mentioned the two others was more work and more direct reports, right? So the most common is layoffs, or keep everyone the same. It's just when you hire more people, just put more people under the same number of people. That's more direct reports, and or just shove more work with existing people. Now, what are some consequences? I could see a lot of consequences of that, especially if it's not thought through. Michelle, I want to, let's take it with you, and then I'll chime in with a couple consequences that I see of taking those approaches.
Yeah, a lot of times, right, especially with layoffs or reassigning work, who stays? Your top performers, right? Who do you give the work to? Your top performers. So what you do is you put all of the weight on your top performers, and then what you end up doing is you sacrifice your top performers because you burn them out. And so, they'll do it, and they'll do it for a while because they want to prove that they're here for you, that they're going to stick this out, and that they're going to prove that they are still a top performer. But at some point it's going to break them, and they're going to leave because they can do it somewhere else for the recognition, for the reward, whatever it is, right? For less stress. And so that's, I think, the biggest consequence is you're going to have turnover. I think the other things is it's going to slow you down. I think that's the thing. It's like, we do this because it's going to save us money, but at the end of the day, It's not, because it's going to slow you down. It's going to actually slow decisions down, because now that leader is taking on more, right? So you've lost the middle management, and maybe it was the middle management was slowing you down because decisions were getting bottlenecked somewhere, but now you've got less people to make decisions, to move things through. So now things are getting bottlenecked in other areas, because now there's more work getting stuck in different channels. And so now there's more people going to one person, and that they're not getting answers. And so, or they're not getting coaching, or they're not getting time they need to get the answers they need. Like they don't get time with this new manager, because this new manager has more direct reports. There's more bottlenecks. It just slows everything down. And so you're not getting that like speed that you need. You're not getting the cost savings, because it's slowing everything down. It's costing everyone time and money.
I totally agree, Michelle. Like, and I like to say nothing's free, right? You just don't get to say, I want less people, same amount of work efficiency and output, and you get that, right? There has to be sacrifices that are made. And we'll get into that, of like, what are the trade-offs, or what needs to be true if you want to go down that path, what needs to be true for you to do it successfully. And so we'll touch more on that, but you hit it on the head. It's where you think you're saving money or cost or efficiency, you end up paying for it in other ways if this process is not thought through. So bottleneck, you hit on the word bottleneck of decision-making flows, right? Fewer people are tasked with more decisions, and more people in their ear that need decisions made, and you get that bottleneck anyway. Another bottleneck that I think occurs with pursuing a strategy of unbossing is upward mobility, right? So one of the major kind of drivers of purpose and is the ability to progress, right, within an organization. And so if you have fewer middle managers, that's more people, fewer seats that they can grow into. And so that's another factor to think about. Is yet another bottleneck to think about is you went from one manager to 6 direct report ratio to 1 to 12, or whatever the number may be. What does promotion look like? Do you inflate titles just to inflate titles? Do you just same title, same effective work, just a little bit more pay? Like all these things, people will see through, and you risk them looking at opportunities elsewhere for more responsibility, not just necessarily the compensation, or the less stress, right? And so
I think that's a huge point. I want to touch on that, but I want to say 2 things first. Neha's in the background.
Hey, Neha.
So I want to say a shout out to Neha. She's going to share some, I did a Google search on this when you and I were talking about this earlier, and I love AI, as everybody knows, but I love what came up on the Google search, and we were able to save the link to the Google search. And so she's going to share that in the chat. Nice. Thank you. There it is. I think we can pull this up. So I'm going to show that real quick. So this is the link, and it should take you to the same results, which I never thought you could ever do, but now we can. Technology has changed so much. So that shows some of the pros and cons that we're talking about. But I want to share an example. So I had a CEO, he was actually a peer of mine, and the CEO that was there before left. He came in, he was there for a short time and left. And so this peer of mine got promoted to CEO. So he took all of his, he was the CFO. So he took all of his CFO, COO, and then CEO. So he took all of his direct reports and now the CEO job with him into this new job. So then he had like 12 direct reports. And I said to him, and he's running around like a chicken with his head cut off, trying to do this new CEO job. And he was a top performer. That's why he got the CEO job. And luckily I was a peer of his before, and I walked in his office and I was like, friend, like, you're not going to be successful if you keep all of your direct reports from before. You can't do this. And I'm like the HR person, I can't do finance. Like I know my role. I know my strengths and weaknesses. Like I can't take over. You could probably hire a CFO, but I knew where I could, and I said I could probably do quality. I could figure that out. Let me take quality from you, and I took quality. But like it's an example of that. Like you can't expect somebody to just take on new things and be successful. And it's the same. Like when you have somebody with so many direct reports, it does. To your point, there's less opportunity for growth, but there's also less opportunity for that leader to coach people so that they can grow, because growth means different things for different people. We've talked about people not wanting to step into leadership roles, but people want to learn from their manager or from the person they're reporting to. So growth might just for them be like, I came to work and I learned something new today, and I can leave going, wow, I learned something new. If they have no time with their leader for a whole week, they're not learning anything new. They're not being stretched. They're not being challenged. There's no opportunity for growth for them. And they do that every week for several weeks. They're not going to stay in an organization. And a new hire, and this data is old, so it's probably changed. This data is as old as I am. So it's probably changed. But it used to be that a new hire would make a decision to leave a company within the first 3 weeks. So if you've got new hires coming in after you've done an unbossing and they have a leader that's not talking to them within the first 3 weeks, they're not staying. So it's important. Like you got to think about these things of like, how are you, if you're unbossing, right? You have to think about how are you making sure that your leaders have enough time to work with their team and coach their team and develop their team. And if you've got leaders that are workers too, they're doing work, which is in a lot of small organizations, that's what we do as leaders. We wear many hats. And that is, for a lot of us, that's exciting. I love that too. I like to wear multiple hats, and that's what gets me up every day. But we have to make the time to coach our people and grow our people. And that's what gets me excited as well. And so you have to make sure that there's time for that, and that they're prioritizing those things, because those are the important things.
And I definitely want to come back and touch on a very important point there is, especially for new hires, how you set the tone is going to really, set the pace and the trajectory of like their experience at the organization. And a new hire coming in and into a manager who's already managing 12 people, and they're the 13th or whatever crazy number it may be. That's not a lot of attention that's available, and that person slips through the cracks and out the organization. And that decision, and I don't think that stat is stale. That decision's made very quickly, right? Employees are really deciding quicker and quicker on whether or not their experience and their stay at the organization is going to be long-term, or how they're thinking about it strategically. So, the work environment and the labor force has changed quite a bit. And, showing, it's not just showing attention to show attention, but it's really onboarding someone well, making sure that they're well-resourced or just well-supported. And, they have what they need. That's extremely tough to do if you already have X amount of other people that also need your help and attention. So I think that's very, very important. You mentioned the development of the employee gets hammered, right, with unbossing. I also think the development of the manager themselves gets hammered, right? You as a manager, there's no real, in my opinion, especially at the middle manager level, there's no real skill to be learned by trying to manage 15 people at the same time. I don't think that's a real skill. And so it's like, well, what is that manager really learning as far as a skill set, right? What a manager, especially at the middle manager level, needs to be learning is how to coach, how to manage conflict, how to, all these other things, communicate, right? Balance, learn each team members different personalities and needs, and create an environment that's still, equitable, fair, but caters to each person's needs, right? And so those are the skills that a middle manager needs to learn, amongst others. But managing 15 people, right, for example, you're just learning how to put out fires, and you're just learning how to just keep your head above water, which is not a real, they're not honing their skills like they should be. And so what kind of managers are you getting, long term? So I think the development of the manager themselves takes a hit, in addition to the employee. Again, if this is not thought through carefully, you're just getting again, you're paying for this in other ways. So
yeah, and how do you get the most out of your people when you can't get to know your people and meet them where they're at, right? And you can't get to know them beyond a surface level. If you don't know, you can't get to know what motivates them, right? You can't get to know what gets them up in the morning, how to really manage them and coach them.
You hit it on the head. To get the most productivity, or create an environment where people are willing to contribute the most productivity, requires a skilled manager to create that environment and pull that out of out of people, keep them motivated to do so, and respond to needs as accordingly. 15 needs that are different needs. Of 15 people, you probably have 17 needs. That's a crazy amount of needs. What really is that manager really learning? So that's not, and does the company win? Does the organization win ultimately by having a structure like that? That's not well thought out. If it's not well thought out, then I think, and ultimately, I think all this leads to a change in culture, right? And so, whatever you think your culture was, or whatever you think you were building your culture to be, or whatever it was before, your culture will change. Just something that different is going to take culture a different direction. Now, if the structure is well thought out, we can assume in a positive direction. If it's not well thought out, before executing, and something you said, Michelle, a lot of these decisions are made in a vacuum, right? It's not really, leaders tend to make these decisions and commit to them before getting the buy-in of everyone else. And so culture will change accordingly. But anything to add to that, Michelle?
Yeah, I do think that if you do eliminate your middle management, your decision making then shifts, right? And it tends to shift up, right? You're not going to then move the decision making down. I think that's the idea, is to move the decision making down, but then the decision making tends to shift up. And so then, like you said, the decisions are then made in a vacuum. And what you do is you end up losing that diversity of thought. And I think that's something to really think about in an organization. Like, then are your decisions then just being made at the top and being pushed down? Are you losing that ability to really think through decisions? And like, your middle managers have the voice of like the front line of your employees, and they're bringing that up to the organization as you make decisions. And so you really lose that voice when you lose that layer of management in your organization. And so how do you get that? And I know we're talking about all the bad things with unbossing, and there are some good things, and that link has that, like the pros and cons, and there are some good things. And I think those are some of the intentions behind unbossing. And if you want those good things, I think you have to be truly intentional with it and think through like, what do we want with this, and how do we get those good things? And I think you have to be really thoughtful. And as we talked about in a couple of weeks ago, when we talked about layoffs and how to build trust after layoffs, you said this, Dominique, I think it's really important, is like, what are the things we have to stop doing during a restructuring? And I think that's really key here, is like, if we're going to do this, what are the things we're going to stop doing? So we're not going to we're going to lose a big chunk of our team, or we're going to change the way we're doing things. What are the things we're going to stop doing? And what are the things we're going to continue doing or focus on, so that we're not going to create mass chaos in the organization and overwhelm people and continue to burden people and burn people out. I think that's a really interesting piece to focus on. And then how are we going to make decisions? How is the decision making going to work? How are we going to gather feedback? How are we going to structure our organization? Is the intention to be a flatter organization? If that's the case, who makes decisions? How is that going to work in the organization? How do we gather feedback? How do we get feedback at the edges, like Dominique likes to say? How does that all work? And what does our culture then feel like without the middle management? Or if we have less management, how do we ensure that people have a voice and we keep that diversity of thought? Because that's so important. And if you lose that as an organization, then I don't think people will stay.
And something you said, Michelle, and during our previous conversation, even before all of that, right? I think, and to your point, I think an organization needs to also sit down and say, is this even right for my organization? Like, given my industry and the type of business I'm in, maybe it is that we just have the layers that we have, right? Just kind of support the structure and how we serve customers. Maybe it is what it is. I don't think all organizations are going to have an opportunity to unboss, quote unquote, any more than they can currently. And so this may not be the right thing for certain types of companies, certain types of industries, certain types of circumstances, situations. And maybe it's more of a specific unbossing, right? Maybe it's within a department or within a particular function, and the rest of the organization kind of stays as is. So I think there's a lot of levers there. But I think, to what you mentioned during our previous conversations, is this even right for my organization? And then from there, those litany of questions that you asked, is, how do we make decisions? What are we going to stop doing? What are the different things, tools, what do we need to invest in as far as tools go to make this better? And you're totally right, right? The intention of a flatter organization is that more people are empowered and more, decisions are being pushed to, the front line. That's theory. That's, that's what organizations tend to want. What actually plays out, to your point, Michelle, is decision making just gets pushed upward. And so thinking about all those those things and making sure that you're actually measuring whether or not your desired effects are taking effect, and you have instruments in place to measure those things in real time, so that you know whether or not you're on track and what adjustments you need to make before any of the bad stuff starts to solidify within culture. So I think you mentioned a few things that were very key.
Yep, great. Well, our time is up here at the bar. It's closing time.
I don't think we ordered drinks. We were just so immersed in the conversation. We didn't get our drink orders in.
Not today. That's all right. Next time. It was a good conversation.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Michelle. Neha, thank you so much in background.
Thank you, Neha. Have a great week, everybody.
You've just experienced another episode of The CXO and CHRO Walk into a Bar, where we share insights at the intersection of talent and revenue. Thank you for joining us. Please join us next week at noon Eastern for more strategic content to help you scale your business. You can follow us on LinkedIn and on YouTube for additional content or episodes you may have missed. The links will be in the comments section. If you'd like more information or to schedule time with Michelle or Dominique, follow the link in the comments section to book time on their calendar. Until next week, cheers.